This morning, we're going to talk about Helping Hands, which is this amazing project, £500,000 through the DCMS and the Arts Council to help with expanding the volunteering pool, if I can put it like that, in Cumbria. Kate Parry at the Cumbria Museums Consortium got this thing off the ground and put the bid in, and there's a number of people on this call who are now part of this project. So I'm going to hand over to Kate to talk about it, and she's going to talk a bit about it and then introduce one or two people who are involved in it as well. So Kate, over to you.
Yeah, good morning. So my day job, when I'm not doing this, running Cumbria Arts and Culture Network, is as head of partnership for Cumbria Museum Consortium. So for the next little while, I'm putting my Cumbria Museum Consortium hat on to tell you about Helping Hands. So let's run the tiny presentation, which is going to tell you a little bit about it. First of all, so I'm going to talk to you about what the project is about, and then I'm going to hand over to Chris Tolley, who is the project manager, who is going to talk to you about what we've been up to so far, because this project has already been running for several months. Then I'm going to introduce you to the members of the new staff team that we have out and about now around the county. Then we're going to open the floor really to a little conversation about what stops people volunteering in Cumbria at the moment. Before we'll wrap up and just explain what's going to happen next and how you can help. So here we are, Helping Hands, volunteer differently, because that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to think differently about volunteering and ask ourselves why people don't volunteer in Cumbria. What stops some people volunteering? What gets in the way? And what can we do to break down those barriers? Because volunteering is a brilliant thing. It's a fantastic way of supporting well-being, and that's one of the main aims of this project. The other aims of the project are to grow the numbers of volunteers in cultural organisations across Cumbria so that those organisations become more sustainable. But crucially, this project is about diversifying the volunteer workforce. So asking why there's a limited range of people who volunteer at the moment. Why are our volunteer teams mostly middle-aged, middle class and white? And how can we change that? So that's what Helping Hands is about. It's about breaking down barriers to volunteering. The way that we're tackling that as a county, because this is a county-wide project over 2 years, is to work with a really wide range of cultural organisations and a huge number of community partners as well. So there's actually about 40 partners, and I'll move on in a moment to just show you who's involved. So it is really, really ambitious and quite terrifying in many respects. It's certainly the biggest thing that I've ever tried to do. But it's because there is a shared need across our cultural organisations, whether they're museums, galleries, theatres, art centres, arts organisations or heritage organisations. First of all, to find more volunteers post-pandemic, and secondly, to find volunteers and to support volunteers who are from different backgrounds. And because of that shared need, we decided to apply for the DCMS Volunteering Futures funding collectively. But somebody's got to fill in the bit of paper. So that was me earlier in the year, and we were successful in securing £490,000 for our 2-year project across the county. That was the second biggest award nationally, and it was 1/10 of the total pot available. So it's a massive investment in Cumbria and a really big project. I try not to think about that too much, because otherwise I would never ever sleep. So next slide, Tom. So here we are. The target by March 2024 is for us to find 500 new volunteers across a wide range of organisations. Next. So let me tell you a little bit more about who's involved in this project. There's a steering group which consists of our strategic partners. They're the ones who are sort of pushing this, driving it, shaping it. And it tends to be the bigger organisations because they've got the capacity to do it. But really this project is about everybody working together and the larger organisations supporting the smaller organisations. I know what it's like to run a small organisation and to not have capacity to try and tackle the things that you want to do. So that's why we've brought in the larger organisations to drive it, but to make sure that the smaller organisations get the benefit of that extra capacity. So these are the people who are steering the project. It's a combination of the bigger cultural organisations with Cumbria CVS, the County Council, and a couple of our community partners who are Cumbria Deaf Association and Anti-Racist Cumbria. Next. We've then decided the best way to try and tackle this project, which is so big and covers such a vast area, is to break down the county into clusters. Because what we decided when we were writing the bid and talking to the possible partners is that the barriers are very different across different parts of Cumbria. What's the case in Millom is often, very different to what the case is, for example, in Penrith or a village in Eden. So by working together in clusters, we can try and identify those local barriers and address them. So the North cluster has these organisations within it as partners at the moment. And you can see that they vary from the tiny organisations like Greencroft Arts to the much bigger museums like Tully House. Next. The West cluster has these organisations within it. Mixture of art centres, museums, theatres, bigger organisations like English Heritage. Next. Then there's the East, which is the really rural cluster. And carry on. Next. The South Central cluster is based around the Kendal area, but it stretches out to Windermere and the surrounds across to Ambleside. And finally, the South cluster next. I will see to change the title, Derek. The South cluster is based around Barrow and has those organisations in it at the moment. So in each cluster, there is one organisation acting as a host, and they are hosting an inclusive volunteering lead whose job it is to lead that work of trying to diversify the volunteer workforces of the partner organisations within it. So in a moment, we're going to meet the inclusive volunteering leads, because that's what we've been doing for the last few months. We've been pulling the team together so that we have somebody based in each cluster. And they will work with those organisations to identify what are the barriers for that organisation, what do they need by way of help, and then they will start to break down those barriers and provide that help. Okay, carry on. There are two partners who are county-wide. In fact, there's a third, because Cumbria Opera Group, although it's residing in the sort of Kendal cluster at the moment, Cumbria Opera Group covers the whole of the county, like National Trust and English Heritage. Okay, carry on. As well as our sort of cultural organisations, we're working with community diversity partners, as we've called them. It's rather a clunky title, but for the purposes of the bid, we needed to make it clear that they are there to help us identify potential new volunteers and provide expertise to support volunteers who might be coming in who've never volunteered before, but also to help us as staff running cultural organisations to learn what we mean by inclusive volunteering and what needs to change, so to provide training. So these are the organisations that we're working with. The AAA project, you'll see there, they support people with autism. So we are looking in particular across 4 protected characteristics. So we're particularly interested to address issues around race, disability and neurodiversity, age, and the 4th one is going to escape me. I knew this would happen. Chris, what's the 4th one?
we've got socioeconomic, age.
Socioeconomics.
Yep.
Socioeconomics, that's the one, thank you very much indeed. And these are the partners that we've brought on board to help. But obviously, we want the widest range of people to have access to volunteering. Next. And finally, the network partners who are here to help spread the word. And top of the list is obviously Cumbria Arts and Culture Network. And it is our job as network partners to communicate progress about the project, but also make sure that we're sharing the opportunities that are generated by the project far and wide. Okay, I think that's the end of the presentation. Thank you, Tom. So I'm now going to introduce Chris Tolley, who's actually appeared and introduced himself a couple of times in the calls already, but for the benefit of those who haven't met him, Chris Tolley is project manager who was recruited back in July. Am I right, Chris?
July the 4th.
Okay. So it has been his job with the rest of the team at Cumbria Museum Consortium to recruit a team of inclusive volunteering leads. Anyway, Chris, introduce yourself and say a little bit about your background and where we're up to so far with the project.
Yeah, certainly. Thanks, Kate. Hello, everyone. As Kate says, I think I've maybe met a couple of you before, but I'll give a bit of an introduction. So yeah, my name's Chris Tolley. I'm the project manager on the Helping Hands project. I joined in July. Previous to that, I worked for an organisation called People First, which is a county-wide organisation, and it has lots of different strands. They do youth work, they're an advocacy organisation, they do work around health. And my role there was as manager of the inclusion team. So as it says on the tin, a lot of my work is really around inclusivity. So ensuring that there was opportunities for a range of people with learning difficulties, autism, a range of people to engage in a range of opportunities and activities and development opportunities. So I loved it there, but it was time for a change. So I seen this opportunity and it sounded great and I wanted to come. At People First, I did have the role of volunteer coordinator for a little while as well. So great to be here. I'll give you an update as to where we are with things actually. So a lot of focus in my first couple of months was around with Kate to form a team, which was quite a task. But I'm happy to say that we are at full capacity now, as from early October. Everyone started their positions, and we've been really fortunate. We brought in a really great team, sort of first time of asking as well. And all the guys are going to introduce themselves in a little while as well. So that includes, we've got 5 inclusive volunteering leads. As Kate said, they're each based in a cluster, which they're going to focus on. We've got 1 inclusive volunteering assistant called Abby. And we've also got some consultants even who are going to help us guide us through certain aspects of the project. And that's a communications consultant and an evaluation consultant. And they're at different stages really, the consultants. The comms strategy is almost complete, which we're ready to roll out, which will be a significant step for us in order to properly launch the project and start to get it more well known. And the evaluation process, including the strategy, is in its earlier stages. So that's where we are with recruitment. All the guys have settled really well. They're going to tell you a little bit about their skills and what they've been up to briefly. Aside from that, it's been really important to try and engage keep all the partners, as Kate's just described, in the loop really as to what's been happening. So that's the cultural delivery partners, community diversity partners and network partners. So there's been an ongoing job to find ways to keep everyone up to date at appropriate times and with appropriate information. And one thing we've done now is the inclusive volunteering lead and assistant are now going to work and communicate with the organisations in their clusters. We had a group meeting last week with all of them, which went really well. So now the next phase is for them to go meet face to face and to talk about, what more in depth about what the barriers are, to try and then develop interventions to support them to overcome that.
Okay, Chris.
Yeah, is that all right?
Yeah, that's absolutely brilliant. Thank you.
Cool.
So I think we'll move on now and meet the inclusive volunteering leads one by one. So I'm just going to ask you to introduce yourself and say, which cluster you are working with, and a little bit about your background and the kind of expertise that you bring. And we're going to do a couple of minutes each. So it's going to be nice and pithy. So Pat, over to you. Could you come off mute?
Good morning, everybody. I'm Pat. I'm based in what is called the South Central cluster. So I'm based out of Kendal, working with our partner at the brewery. So that's my base. Obviously, it's quite we're covering the area across to Ulverston and up as far as Ambleside. So obviously, it's quite a highly populated area within Lakeland, and quite a lot of big partners to work with, including the brewery and Lakeland Arts. And obviously looking forward, hopefully, to Abbott Hall being up and running and getting ready for that. My background is mainly education. More recently, I ran a general FE provision at Newtonwig College, including a great department with 50 young people with a variety of additional needs. More recently, I've worked at People First for Chris, so I know what his team was like there, and I'm very, very keen to work on an inclusive basis. And I'm trying to get round to meet everybody. I also work very closely with Abby because we're both based in the south of the county, and with Verity because we have like borderline sort of overlapping links. So we have, I think we're going to be working quite closely together, but are part of Cumbria. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Let's go to Verity in Barrow.
Hi everyone, yes, I'm Verity, and as Kate said, I'm based in Barrow, so I'm covering most of Furness, so my cluster's called the South Cluster. My particular background has quite a focus on disabled inclusivity, so actually as of a couple of days ago, a heritage access report that I collaborated on has been published. So I can pop a link to that in the chat if any of you are interested in our findings of what access looks like in the UK at this point. And also it has some very practical advice on what heritage organisations can do for free and very quickly and hopefully easily in order to improve their inclusion. And I also have some fair background working with people involved in the social care system, so predominantly people in foster care and care leavers. So I'm really excited to bring this experience to the role and also, of course, learn so much more when supporting the area.
Great, thank you, Verity. And Verity's just moved up from Oxford to Barrow. So Andrew, have you met Verity yet?
No, I haven't. I was just about to pop a note in chat. Yeah, so we should sort that out very soon. Yeah.
Look out for Verity. She's the new kid on the block in Barrow.
She's very welcome.
Okay, Jay, over to you.
Hi, my name's Jay Anson, so I'm the volunteering lead for the East area. So quite a dispersed population across quite a big patch of land. My two main bases are Penrith at Highlights and also working out of Wordsworth at Grasmere. So quite different organisations with quite different needs. So it's really at the moment, it's going around all the various partners in the area to really find out what does volunteering mean to them and what is it they need help and support with. Background, what haven't I done? I suppose the most relevant ones, I spent a long time working in social enterprise. I've also run my own businesses, and then more recently working in supporting people long-term unemployed with significant additional barriers to employment, then worked for AAA on the Transforming Care project as a autism support worker, navigator, helping people with autism who are at significant risk. And then my last job was actually at the Department of Work and Pensions. COVID forced me to look for a proper job, and I ended up going and signing up to the civil service for a year. But I've escaped back into much more interesting work, and so really looking forward to bringing a fairly diverse background to the fore in getting this project to be the success it surely should be.
Thank you, Jo, that's great. Kim.
Oh, thank you, Kate. Hi, everyone. I'm Kimberly Smith, and I cover the West Coast, everything from Ravenglass down the south, up towards Mary Portson House, Roman Museum, and across east to Keswick, even to Castlereagh. So that's my patch with the sea on the side. I know where I'm going, always know which direction I'm going in. So previously, at present, I'm also a trustee at Rose Hill Theatre, and Rose Hill Theatre are one of my places where I work out of, along with Theatre by the Lake. And previously, I worked for Cumbria Action for Sustainability in a service called Coal to Cosy Homes, which was dealing with the most vulnerable in Cumbria who couldn't access support for their energy bills and keeping their homes warm. And it was facilitating how people actually did that and supporting people to actually get the support they need, which is critical at the moment, as you can imagine. It was a good time for me to leave, I suppose. Previously, I worked as Community Engagement Officer covering Cumbria for the NSPCC. And before that, for the patch of the whole of the north of England for Leonard Cheshire Disability. Though I'm a lawyer by training, I moved due to my own circumstances into the third sector and have been working with volunteers and community engagement for very many years. So that's me.
Brilliant, thank you. And finally, Janet over there at Tully House today.
Hello everyone. Yes, I'm Janet. I'm based here at Tully House, as Kate says. I'm working for the North Cluster. My background, I've been in the voluntary community sector for getting on 30 years. I did actually start in the heritage sector at Nented Mines near Alston in Cumbria, but I've been working across the northeast for the last 20 odd years, mainly originally around running a development trust, so it's working in deprived areas, but more recently working freelance with people with women with health issues and migrants, asylum seekers, refugees, helping women start their own businesses. I'm also a trustee of a community interest company over in the northeast, and yeah, done lots and lots of things over that side. Looking forward to doing lots of things over this side.
Great. So as you can see, we've got a really strong group of people. We're really pleased with the way things have panned out. Really varied backgrounds, lots of experience of supporting people and helping people on sort of tailored journeys. And that's what this project is about. It's about reaching people who've never had the chance to volunteer before, for whatever reason that is. So Tom, I'm just going to hand to you now to kind of broaden the conversation a little bit.
Thank you. What a fascinating bunch of hoodlums you are. I think it's going to be fascinating to see the progress of this project. I hope it'll be highly competitive between regions as well. I think you should all be, keeping tabs as to how many volunteers you manage to get recruited, etc., etc. So no, honestly, a really great selection of different people, and Verity to move from Oxford to Barrow. What a jump that is. What a great move you've made as well. Barrow is a fascinating place. Walney Island has to be one of the most beautiful places in Cumbria. But what a great move. So good luck with that. And I just had a quick look at the report that you just put a link to. Actually, it looks really interesting. And I think we might be able to delve into that a bit deeper at some stage. I'm just going to play devil's advocate, if I may, to begin with. But this is an opportunity for anyone else to ask questions, by the way, about this project, or to offer some reflections or some early thoughts. But £490,000 in this day and age is a lot of money. And there might be people either on this call or not on this call, who would question why is that a good use of public money to be spent. You know, we seem to be trundling along okay at the moment in Cumbria with volunteering, and £490,000 is a big investment. So Kate, why is this money actually needed?
Because we're not trundling along okay with volunteering. It's easy to reach that conclusion, but all the organisations that have signed up are experiencing, you know, having lost volunteers as a result of the COVID pandemic, people not returning. And also it's not okay to just trundle along, ignoring the fact that our workforces are white, middle-aged, middle class. It doesn't make for rich and varied organisations, and it doesn't help to bring a wider range of people into our organisations. It doesn't help engage a range of people. If the only people you ever see when you go into our organisations are white, you know, with people who come from a privileged background, then how is that ever going to be relevant to people who are not in that position themselves? So £490,000 over 2 years across pretty much all the cultural organisations in the county is, in my view, money well spent, and clearly we made that case to the DCMS and Arts Council. Chris, do you want to add something?
Yes, please, if that's okay. Just, you know, I didn't mention this previously because it wasn't not entirely relevant at that time, but, you know, a lot of my background is around health and well-being, and, you know, I've got a real passion for that. And I think at the minute, you know, due to the COVID situation, you know, people, you know, a lot of people are experiencing ill mental health, and you know, the you know, GPs, NHS are really sort of overwhelmed at the minute. And I think what some organisations are trying to work towards now is sort of the social prescribing way of supporting people. So that's like opportunities like, you know, volunteering to increase confidence, resilience. So I think the benefits that you know, volunteering will have on the community and on people, you know, 500 people, that's massive. You know, if you think of 500 people trying to go to GPs or doctors and, you know, get support. So I think if we can help them, you know, support them people to increase you know, their personal development and how they feel, I think that's massive as well, and hard to put a cost on that.
Yeah.
Rob, did you want to say something?
Yeah, sorry, I missed some of the talk. I had to take a call. I was wondering, what would be success? You know, what would success look like for you guys? That's a question we're quite often asked, and with the projects that we do, and whether, you know, sad to say, metrics will play a role in this, you know, the data that's collected, and whether any other areas are also got a similar sort of funding pot to actually try and look at this. But social prescribing, as just spoken about, I think is a really good thing, you know, the fact that people get from it, as well as the organisations, of course.
So success will look like those 500 people having good, meaningful engagement as volunteers, ideally over a length of time, in a way that, you know, positively affects their life and their next steps. But it also looks like all of those organisations adjusting the way that they work and go about recruiting and supporting volunteers for the long term, so that you know, beyond the life of this project, which will finish at the end of March 24, those organisations have the confidence and the skills and the connections and the relationships to carry on recruiting volunteers differently and providing support that people need, so that we don't just revert back to the same cohort of people after the project. That is what we're driving at, and it's one of the really important bits of the project, is to look ahead and say, how do we sustain this? Julia?
Yeah, I just had a practical question actually. If we know of someone that we think would benefit from participating in this, who might make an appropriate volunteer and who kind of hit some of the targets you're looking at in terms of the kind of groups you're looking to reach, what do they do? Is there a kind of central email address or phone number they can use to get in contact? What's the practical process for kind of putting your name forward to find out what volunteering opportunities are out there and to get some support?
That's an excellent question, and it's obviously what we want everybody to do, is to go out there and you know, put forward people who might benefit. We're in the process of developing website and a mechanism that will allow people to sign up and to see what's possible and to get in touch with us. But in the meantime, in the very short term, contact Chris. Chris, could you just put your email address in the chat, and Chris will sort of save up that and start to broker the conversations, because that's partly what this project is about. It's about brokering opportunities, finding the right role for any individual in the right place. Derek.
Yeah, well, can I come to Derek in a second? If I could just first of all, Fliss has put in chat there. Yeah, sorry, another devil's advocate question. It seems unsurprising that volunteers are, as you describe, you have to have time and resources, etc., available to do something for nothing. Maybe paying people to do the job would be another way of doing it. Have you considered that at all? Maybe that's a question for any of the people that are involved in the project. It doesn't necessarily have to be Kate, but any thoughts about, you know, actually, you know, it's not surprising that volunteers are white, middle class, middle-aged, as you say, Kate.
Yeah.
Actually, money matters.
It does, of course it does. And if it was possible for organisations to pay everybody for everything, then they would. But that is not possible or sustainable. And where we can pay people to do jobs, we absolutely do. But volunteering is a different thing, isn't it? It's a different opportunity, and it comes with its own benefits and flexibilities and things. Do any of the rest of the team want to chip in?
I see Jay and Pat have got their hands up, still looking at Derek, but Jay or Pat, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I think one of the very important thing from my point of view, having spent a lot of time in my past working with very disadvantaged people who have been long-term employed and have significant barriers, the volunteering to build confidence, competencies, skills, and that belief in themselves that they can achieve things is really important. And they're not ready to move into paid employment because that's such a scary big step for them. But if you can get them through the door to volunteer, it not only improves their lives, but it enriches the organisations in which they volunteer, because they're bringing in people who might never, ever have accessed those places before.
Yeah, it sounds like this project is going to influence the organisations as much as the volunteers themselves. Pat, do you want to come in, and then we'll come to Derek?
Yes, very quick example. I can't remember who's in Barrow. Who was
Verity.
Based in Barrow? I know Verity, but on the group.
Oh, Andrew. Andrew's there.
Andrew, right. Andrew, you probably know the Well very well, don't you, down at which is a great organisation. I have actually done quite a lot of work with them over the past couple of years. And they're an organisation that work with people who are on drug and alcohol rehabilitation. They're a very successful organisation. They've got a 70% rate of achievement of getting people clean and back into society. They now have a hostel in Kendal, and I popped in there last week because I had a spare hour, so I just went to say hello to them and explain the project. And they are so eager to get involved in local volunteering because it's part of their recovery. But also the person who runs the hostel said, you know, I've lived in Kendal 50 years and I've never been inside Outback Hall because I never felt it was for me. So it's about reaching out to those people and changing those perceptions, both as volunteers, but also as people who can go into a gallery and actually see somebody like themselves in future. Thanks.
Thank you, Pat. Derek.
Well, just one or two random thoughts, really. Speaking personally, I started volunteering here when I retired and actually came to live here permanently, having lived here part-time for quite a long time. And it was a way of becoming involved in the community. Now, an awful lot of people grow up in the communities here. Some of them will, by their very nature, wish to be part of things. Others are shyer of that. One of the great potential advantages of volunteering, and I think Jay rather alluded to this just now, is the possibility to acquire skills and experience in order to have a better chance of gaining employment. So although, I mean, Fliss is quite right, the vast majority, I mean, I was a volunteer at Theatre by the Lake for a long time and still technically am, although I'm not fit enough to do what I used to do. The great majority of volunteers there are indeed white, middle-aged, and I don't think I even qualify as middle-aged anymore, but there we go. And in a way that is inevitable. But there has to be a way of combining with schools better, because the schools are surely the key to this, in being fully involved in their communities. And I'm just thinking about Keswick and Cockermouth, two schools there which are a reflection of the community. They give a great deal of possible access to local organizations. And I'm not just thinking about well-tried schemes like work experience, but I just think sometimes there is too little done. There's too little communication between schools and community projects. And there's resistance on one side or another. And if that barrier could be broken down, I think that would go a long way to helping with it.
I think those are very pertinent points. And obviously you come from running schools yourself, Derek, don't you? That's your background. So you know about these things. And I think people listening on this call who have got schools in their patches, and of course everybody will have schools in their patches, will be listening to that carefully, because I think
so I'm going to say one more thing. I think
yeah.
Another problem, of course, is that unless we're talking about somebody, say, who lives in Keswick and can volunteer at Theatre by the Lake. When I was volunteering, I live in Bassingthwaite, volunteering at Theatre by the Lake for an evening show, the only way I could do it was by having my own transport. The last bus back from Keswick is 9 o'clock.
Yeah.
And the dearth of reliable public transport is another barrier in quite a lot of places.
Well, let me pick up on that about barriers. I'm just going to reflect a couple of comments in chat. So Amy was saying there are hidden disabilities, long COVID and chronic pain, fatigue, for example, which could be a barrier to volunteering. So that's another potential barrier. Judith's saying she spent 2 years volunteering in her early 20s alongside working as a cleaner to get the experience I needed to get my first job in the voluntary sector. And I wouldn't have got the job without the volunteering giving me a foot in the door. So again, young people, this gives them a bit of work experience there as well. So Kate, let's get on to barriers. Do you want to pick up on the question of what are the barriers to volunteering and maybe how this project might try and tackle them?
I'm just interested to know what your experience here is collectively of, and your thoughts on what stops people volunteering at the moment and what stops people being able to stay as a volunteer. You know, what gets in the way? And I'd like to hear your thoughts.
I got ME 30 years ago, and having been a complete workaholic who worked all the time, I went nuts and needed to do some voluntary work. And in fact, the biggest voluntary job I did was after my partner died. Actually, it was my kind of bereavement project. I wanted to go to the gigs of a music organisation. Now, this was in London, it wasn't in Cumbria, but I couldn't afford to go to the gigs. So I offered to film them because I'm a filmmaker by trade and I had a camera. So I offered to just sit at the front and film them and put them online in a very early YouTube days. Nobody really knew what YouTube was. And as a result of that, I got to see the concert for nothing. And I've done that quite a lot ever since. And I now am permanently on the guest list of 2 music organisations in London as a result. But for me, it was very much getting to meet people, because I was alone and I felt very lonely. But also it gave me a purpose, and I made a difference. But I did initiate it,
Okay.
and I didn't feel like I was a do-gooder. I think it's that thing of feeling you're a do-gooder might put people off. I don't know, but I mean, this was not. It was just working with a little organisation that had been going for years that were absolutely chaotic, and I helped them get their act together, and I devised a website.
Helen, I think what you just said about not wanting to be seen as a do-gooder is that itself a barrier. And that's an interesting one that I'm not sure that it's on the list yet. Maybe it is, but I think it's an interesting one, and I'm not quite sure how we get around it, but it needs to be on the list.
Can I?
And just one other thing I wanted to say is I think it's really, really important to tell people if you can provide expenses, because at the moment I've been doing voluntary work with an environmental organisation in Teesdale, and they didn't tell me that they could pay my petrol, and then it cost me about 20 quid to get up there, and I was doing it because I wanted to, and it was really good fun. But it then turns out they do have money to pay expenses, and that's just really, really important, I think.
Helen, thank you for that. Can I, Verity, I'm going to put you on the spot. I'm going to make an assumption, probably wrongly, that you might be one of the youngest people on this call. What do you think are the barriers to volunteering, either from your perspective or as a representative of young people? I don't really care, but what do you think are the barriers to volunteering?
Big and good question. That's kind of that question actually has been the focus of my work for the last couple of weeks. But speaking from the perspective of young people, in Barrow, lots of the conversations that I'm having is, as has been previously mentioned, lots to do with perceptions of volunteering and self-identity. So I'm hosted by Barrowful, and in the office we've had lots of conversations about people not wanting to be seen by their friends volunteering, and being nervous about how other people might think of them if they're known to be publicly a volunteer, which actually leads on to another point that's come up in our group meetings across Cumbria, where a few different people have thought that the word volunteering itself is a barrier, and that people have different interpretations of what that means and maybe put off. So for example, one person might be put off of volunteering, but they'd be very happy to lend a hand or do their bit and do some work. And it's all of these semantics I find so interesting, that it really has quite a powerful impact on people's behavior and whether or not they feel like they belong as part of a team. They feel as though they're doing something that fits with how they feel about themselves and their own identity, and whether or not they're open to even considering something. So I think that would be quite interesting to explore in this project, because of course we want to make it clear, we want to set expectations quite clear, that actually none of these organisations will have the funds to pay people. We need to be very clear that we're looking for volunteers, people that will give up their time freely. But then at the same time, of course, there are so many barriers to do with that. And of course, that's just one answer to your question. There are lots of others, but that's one I found particularly interesting over the last few weeks.
It's a great answer, and it's great to hear that you're listening, because actually, I'm sure a lot of the project at the moment is about trying to get to the bottom of things by listening to both organisations and their leaders and their staff, but also people who are either volunteering already or who aren't volunteering already, and finding out about those motivations. Thank you, Verity, for answering that question as I put you on the spot. Kate, did you want to come back on anything? We're coming towards the end of the meeting.
Well, there are so many other barriers that we're kind of finding out about. Many of them were, many of them are clearer, like transport, as Derek said. Some of them are much more subtle, like actually competition between organisations. I didn't put that in the bid. I didn't stop to think about that, but actually it's coming up as a real feature, not in a sort of aggressive or unpleasant way, but it's like there's a very small pool of people in Cumbria. So if somebody down the road is offering expenses and we're not, then that's a problem. And so there's all sorts of subtle, nuanced barriers emerging, which are really, really interesting. Anyway, Jay, did you want to chip in?
Yeah, well, it's just a couple of things. One is, yeah, I think really importantly, what we're discovering as the leads is how we sell it, how it's put to people is very important about how they consider what it is. I kind of think of it, I remember in previous life, a lot of things were about courses for long-term unemployed people, and that immediately made them think that was something they could fail. So we changed it to running sessions or groups, and immediately we had a lot more engagement. So it's sometimes just about one word. The other thing is about the comment about expenses and things like that. We do have to be quite careful. This is with my previous DWP head on, is that for people who are in receipt of benefits, anything that might be construed as benefit in kind could impact on their benefits. We have to tread quite carefully around that area.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jay. Just a note, I'm seeing that Judith's talking about, yeah, she agrees the word volunteer can be a barrier. So interesting avenue of exploration there about language and vocabulary.
Yeah. And if we're thinking differently, then sometimes we have to maybe strip it right back and talk and think about the way that we describe the opportunities that we're going to create. So there's loads that's interesting and lots of work to do. Can I just conclude, Tom, by saying that if you're interested, if there's something that's piqued your curiosity, or maybe you're thinking, well, hang on a minute, my organisation should be on that list and isn't, please get in touch with Chris, and he has put his details in the chat. It's an easily rememberable email because it's christ@tullyhouse.org.
That's pretty memorable. That is pretty memorable.
He should have the answers, shouldn't he?
Just to pick up on another Chris on the call, Chris, not Christ. Chris Bridgman says that's a fabulous range and depth of experience across those area leads, and I would concur there. What a great selection of people that you pulled together there, and really good luck with making it. Or tough job, lots of meetings, talking, all that sort of stuff. 2 parish notices for you. Sue says, before we close the meeting, following on from her beautiful presentation last week on Conrad Atkinson, which is now, by the way, available on the CACN website. She's written an obituary for him in Cumbria Life, which will be in the next issue, so I look forward to reading that. I got a note from Colin Glover before this meeting to say that he couldn't make this meeting because he was going to a conversation about the Turkish baths in Carlisle. The Friends of Carlisle Turkish Baths are keen to get as much feedback as possible on their feasibility study. You might be aware of these baths, you might have used them. The council decided to mothball them at a decision a couple of weeks ago. Anyway, the Friends are holding a public drop-in at the meeting room at Tully House this afternoon, 1:30 to 5:45. Would it be possible to mention this on the call for anyone who might be in Carlisle this afternoon, please? So if you like the Turkish baths and you're in Carlisle this afternoon, there's a meeting at Tully House starting at 1:30 as they battle to keep them open as the new swimming pool opens in the sands and the council reorganises how they're going to spend their money. So that's the Turkish baths. It's 10:30. Thank you ever so much for coming this morning. It's always an absolute privilege to spend an hour with you on a Friday morning. Thank you to all of our contributors. Too many names to remember, but Pat, Chris, Kate,
Janet.
Kim, Janet, Verity, Jay. I think that's everybody. great to have you. Do join us again from time to time, or every week if you want, because I think we need to keep in touch with this project. And we are one of the networks that's going to keep it communicating well and getting people interested in it. And I think it's actually been a really interesting conversation this morning, just to start to look at what are the motivations for volunteering, what are the barriers, and what are the plans in place to spend this money that Cumbria has fortunately got through a great application to make this thing work. So it'll be fascinating to see its progress. Thanks, everyone. Next week, we are going to look at the hair exhibition that's just opened at Tully House. Lovely piece on border I saw last week. So that's going to be interesting. I'm away next week, so Chris and Kate are going to be looking after you very beautifully, and I will catch you again in 2 weeks' time. But in the meantime, have a nice Friday, have a nice weekend, and enjoy the culture and arts of Cumbria and everything else besides.